The metal locker door gave a tired squeak as it swung open for what Emily Harper believed would be the last time. A thin layer of dust clung to the top shelf, and the smell of hospital bleach mixed with old coffee drifted through the empty staff room. Her hands moved slowly as she folded a faded blue scrub top that had carried 12 years of long nights, missed holidays, and quiet heartbreak. Then the sound came. Heavy diesel engines rolled into the hospital parking lot, one after another. Every nurse in the hallway stopped moving. Emily looked toward the window, never guessing the convoy outside had come for her. The hospital was never truly quiet. Even in the late afternoon, machines hummed behind closed doors. Stretchers rolled over polished floors. Shoes tapped across white tile. The air always smelled of disinfectant, with a faint trace of cafeteria soup drifting through the vents. Emily knew every sound by heart. She had spent more nights inside these walls than inside her own home. She was not famous. She was not the nurse whose picture hung in the lobby after winning awards. Most patients forgot her name before they left. Yet many remembered her calm hands when pain became too much to carry. Emily liked it that way. She believed the best work happened when nobody noticed. For 12 years, she had arrived before sunrise, parked in the same corner of the employee lot, and walked through the sliding glass doors carrying the same worn lunch bag. Every morning, she smiled at the security guard. Every evening, she left after making sure someone else had everything they needed first. No one knew she almost never went straight home. She always made one extra stop before turning onto the quiet country road where she lived alone. That small habit had become one of the many mysteries nobody ever asked about. The locker room around her looked strangely empty now. Most of her pictures had already been taken down. A dried flower from a patient rested inside a notebook. A tiny silver dog tag hung from one hook inside the locker, scratched almost smooth from years of being touched. She reached toward it, then stopped. Instead, she closed the locker halfway as if she could not yet say goodbye. Outside, dark clouds gathered over the parking lot. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The world looked gray enough to disappear. A younger nurse stepped into the room carrying fresh towels. She smiled politely before noticing the cardboard box sitting beside Emily's feet. Everyone had heard the news. Budget cuts. Another round of staff reductions. Emily had accepted early retirement because someone younger needed the job more than she did. At least that was the story she told everyone. The truth stayed locked behind tired eyes that had learned long ago how to hide pain without saying a word. If you have ever watched someone smile while carrying more than anyone could see, you already understand the quiet heart of stories like this. Emily lifted the box. It was lighter than she expected. One framed photograph, 2 notebooks, 3 small thank you cards written in shaky handwriting, the silver dog tag, nothing else. 12 years reduced to a box that barely filled both hands. She walked slowly through the medical ward one final time. Patients rested behind curtains. Monitors blinked soft green lights. An elderly man slept with a folded blanket tucked under his chin exactly the way Emily always arranged it. She stopped only long enough to straighten one corner. Habit was hard to leave behind. Several nurses waved. One doctor nodded. Nobody realized she had quietly paid for medicine more than once when a family could not afford it. Nobody knew she often stayed an hour after every shift without writing those hours down. She never wanted praise. She only wanted people to hurt a little less. As she reached the front lobby, something unusual caught her eye. The security officer stood outside, staring toward the entrance road. His shoulders looked stiff. His radio crackled. Visitors were slowing down near the windows. Emily followed their gaze. Far beyond the hospital sign, headlights appeared through the rain. Not one vehicle. Several. Large military trucks, black SUVs, 2 military police motorcycles. The convoy moved with careful precision. Nobody spoke. Engines echoed across the wet pavement. Hospital workers gathered near the glass doors. Someone quietly guessed an injured officer must be arriving. Another thought it might be a government official. Emily barely looked. Military patients had come through the hospital before. She assumed today would be no different. She turned back toward the exit carrying her box. But the convoy did not drive toward the emergency entrance. It turned, slowly, directly toward the employee parking lot. Something changed inside the crowd. Even the automatic doors seemed to hesitate before sliding open. Rain carried the smell of wet asphalt inside. The first SUV stopped, then the second. The trucks lined up behind them with perfect spacing. Every engine shut off within seconds of each other. Silence settled over the parking lot, not normal silence. The kind that makes people forget to breathe. Watch carefully. The smallest detail often tells the biggest story. Emily noticed something no one else seemed to see. Every soldier climbing out of the vehicles looked toward her before looking anywhere else. Not toward the hospital, not toward the emergency room. Toward her. Her fingers tightened around the cardboard box. She glanced behind herself. Perhaps they were looking at someone else. There was nobody there. One officer stepped forward wearing dress uniform despite the rain. Rows of ribbons crossed his chest. His boots stopped several feet away. He removed his cap, then waited. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he lowered his head with quiet respect. Emily felt strangely uncomfortable. She searched her memory. Had she treated him before? Faces blurred together after so many years. The officer finally looked up. His expression carried something deeper than gratitude. It looked like unfinished history. Emily's eyes drifted almost without thinking toward the silver dog tag resting inside her open box. For just a second, the officer noticed it too. Neither of them moved. Neither looked away. Around them, nurses whispered. Doctors stood frozen beneath the hospital entrance. Even patients near the windows watched without understanding why dozens of soldiers had suddenly formed two quiet lines across the rain-soaked pavement. The answer had been hidden for years. Only 3 people alive still knew the full story, and one of them had just stepped out of the last vehicle in the convoy. As the rear door slowly opened, Emily's breathing became almost impossible to hear. She recognized the cane before she recognized the man holding it. Everything she believed she had buried 12 years ago was walking back into her life. If stories about quiet courage and hidden heroes speak to your heart, this is Silent Lifeline, a place where silent pain finds comfort, hope, and healing. Stay with this story, because the reason this convoy crossed 3 states for one forgotten nurse is far more personal than anyone standing in that parking lot could imagine. The old man took one careful step onto the wet pavement, then another. Rain landed softly on the worn leather of his gloves. The soldiers did not rush to help him. They knew he would never allow it. His back remained straight despite the cane. His eyes searched only for Emily. She felt the world grow strangely smaller. The parking lot disappeared. The voices faded. All she could see was the scar running along the old man's jaw, a scar she had cleaned with trembling hands many years before. Only then did she realize why the silver dog tag in her box suddenly felt heavier than everything else she carried, and why today had never been about cleaning out her locker at all. Emily did not move. Rain slid from the edge of the hospital roof and splashed against the pavement between her and the old man. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but it seemed louder than the diesel engines that had filled the parking lot only moments before. Around her, doctors, nurses, and visitors stood frozen beneath the covered entrance. Nobody understood why a military convoy had stopped for a woman who had spent most of her life trying not to be noticed. The old man rested both hands on the handle of his cane before taking another slow step. His gray hair was damp from the rain, but his uniform was pressed so neatly that it looked untouched by time. Every metal on his chest caught the weak afternoon light. Emily finally remembered his face. Not from this year. Not from the last decade. From a night she had promised herself she would never speak about again. Her breathing became shallow. The cardboard box slipped slightly in her hands. The silver dog tag inside shifted with a quiet metallic click. That tiny sound made the old man smile for the first time. Not a wide smile, just enough to show that he remembered it too. 12 years earlier, that same dog tag had landed on the floor of a crowded trauma room after doctors cut away a blood-soaked combat jacket. Emily had picked it up before anyone else noticed. She'd cleaned the blood from its surface. Then she slipped it into her pocket because something told her it mattered. She never imagined she would still have it all these years later. The old man stopped a few feet away. Behind him, more soldiers stepped from the convoy. Some were young enough to be Emily's children. Others carried scars that showed beneath neatly pressed sleeves. One man walked with a carbon fiber leg. Another wore hearing aids barely visible beneath cropped hair. None of them spoke. Their silence carried more respect than applause ever could. The younger nurses standing behind Emily exchanged confused looks. One quietly asked another if the visitor was a retired general. Another wondered if the hospital had forgotten to announce some military ceremony. No one guessed the truth, because the truth had never appeared in any newspaper. No award ceremony had ever mentioned Emily Harper. No television crew had stood outside this hospital. No photograph of that winter night had ever been published. Some stories stayed hidden because the people inside them wanted it that way. If you enjoy stories that uncover the quiet hero's history almost forgot, staying with this one helps keep those stories alive. The old man's eyes settled on the cardboard box. He noticed the faded thank you cards, the worn notebooks. Finally, the silver dog tag. His shoulders lowered with visible relief. For years, he had wondered whether it still existed. Emily slowly reached into the box. Her fingers wrapped around the cold metal. The chain felt exactly the same. Smooth in some places, rough in others. One deep scratch crossed the front. Another marked the edge near the hole where the chain passed through. She remembered making that scratch herself while trying to cut away damaged clothing with emergency scissors. She had apologized even though the man lying on the operating table had been unconscious. Small memories often survive when larger ones fade. She held the tag in her open hand. The old man looked at it for several long seconds. Still, neither of them spoke. The silence became almost sacred. Behind the convoy, another black SUV rolled slowly into the parking lot. Unlike the others, it carried no military markings. 2 people stepped out. A woman wearing a dark business suit, a young soldier carrying a long wooden case wrapped in dark blue cloth. Emily frowned. She had no idea why either of them was there. One mystery had barely begun. Another had just arrived. The wind picked up. Rain carried the smell of wet pine from the trees beyond the hospital. Leaves drifted across the parking lot. Some caught beneath polished military boots. Nobody moved to brush them away. The suited woman stopped beside the old man but remained a respectful distance behind him. Her hands held a thick envelope sealed with dark blue wax. It looked old. Older than anything else in the parking lot. Emily stared at it without understanding why her chest suddenly felt tight. Something inside told her that envelope had been waiting a very long time. The old man slowly nodded toward it. The woman stepped forward. She carefully placed the envelope into Emily's free hand. The paper felt surprisingly heavy. Its edges were worn from years of careful handling. Across the front was only one name, Emily Harper. Nothing else. No address, no date, just her name. She turned it over. The seal had never been broken. Whoever wrote it had trusted that one day it would reach her. She looked back toward the old man. Questions filled her face. He answered only by lowering his eyes. That single movement told her everything. He had protected this letter for years. Notice how even now no one rushed the moment. Some answers lose their meaning when they arrive too quickly. The soldiers remained perfectly still despite the rain soaking their uniforms. One young corporal quietly wiped water from the polished wooden case before returning to attention. Emily noticed the care in that simple act. Whatever rested inside that case mattered deeply. The hospital entrance had become crowded. Patients in wheelchairs. Visitors carrying flowers. Doctors still wearing gloves from interrupted procedures. Even the ambulance crew stood beside their vehicle watching. Nobody reached for a phone. Nobody shouted. The respect spreading through the crowd seemed to arrive without anyone asking for it. Emily looked down at the envelope again. A tiny stain marked one corner. Not water. Old coffee. She smiled before she could stop herself. Only one person she'd ever known constantly spilled coffee onto paperwork. The memory hit with painful clarity. A younger officer, always carrying maps, always forgetting to sleep, always thanking nurses before thanking doctors. She had not thought about him in years, or at least she had tried not to. The old man's voice finally broke the silence. It was quiet, steady, heavy with age. He simply told her the time had finally come, nothing more. Those few words carried 12 years of waiting. Emily's fingers trembled. Just enough for the envelope to shake. She did not open it. Not yet. Something inside told her that once the seal broke, nothing in her life would remain the same. Behind the old man, the soldier holding the wooden case lowered his eyes. He looked barely 25, yet tears quietly gathered without falling. Emily noticed. So did the old man. Neither mentioned it. There was a reason that young soldier had been chosen to carry the case. Emily simply did not know it yet. Every story has a moment when the past quietly walks into the present. This was that moment. The wind eased. Rain became lighter. Gray clouds shifted just enough for a narrow beam of sunlight to fall across the convoy. It landed directly on the scratched silver dog tag resting in Emily's hand. The tiny piece of metal reflected light across the old man's medals. For just 1 second, both seemed connected. The dog tag, the medals, the letter, the wooden case, pieces of one story. Pieces Emily had never been allowed to see together. If this story has reminded you how one small act of kindness can echo for years, consider leaving a single word in the comments after you finish listening. Sometimes one quiet word lets another person know they are not alone. Emily slowly looked toward the young soldier holding the wooden case. Something about his face felt familiar, not because she had met him, because he looked remarkably like someone she once fought to save. The same eyes, the same jaw, the same quiet way of standing. The realization sent a chill through her. She glanced back at the sealed envelope, then toward the old man, finally toward the young soldier again. She did not yet know the truth, but somewhere deep inside, her heart had already begun to recognize it. And the answer waiting inside that unopened letter was far bigger than anything she had ever imagined. Emily looked from the young soldier to the old man once more, the same shape of the eyes, the same calm posture, the same habit of keeping both hands perfectly still. It could not be a coincidence. Her heart beat harder than it had during any emergency shift she could remember. The envelope felt heavier with every passing second, as if the paper inside carried years instead of words. The old man gave a slow nod. Emily finally broke the seal. The crack of old wax was almost lost beneath the sound of rain dripping from the hospital roof. Inside rested several folded pages. The paper had turned slightly yellow with age. A single photograph slipped free before she could stop it. It landed face up against the wet pavement. A young military officer smiled from the picture, standing beside a military working dog with one hand resting on its back. Emily froze. She knew that face, not from today, not from yesterday, from the longest night of her entire career. The memory rushed back without warning. The emergency room doors had burst open just after midnight 12 years earlier. Snow blew inside with the soldiers carrying a badly wounded officer on a combat stretcher. His uniform had been torn apart by shrapnel. Blood soaked through every bandage placed on him during the flight home. The trauma room filled with controlled chaos. Monitors beeped. Surgical lights burned white overhead. Doctors called out numbers. Nurses moved with practiced speed. Emily had been one of them. She remembered cutting away the damaged uniform. She remembered finding the scratched dog tag. She remembered the officer trying to stay awake long enough to ask only one thing, not about himself, about the military dog that had been beside him. Even while slipping toward unconsciousness, his thoughts had stayed with someone else. The dog had survived. The officer never learned that. Emily had made sure the animal reached the veterinary team before returning to the trauma room. It had been one small decision in one impossible night. She never imagined that choice would ripple across so many lives. The photograph trembled between her fingers. On the back was a handwritten date, exactly 12 years ago. The old man quietly watched her remember. Around them, no one interrupted. Even the hospital entrance seemed strangely still. The letter continued in neat handwriting. It explained that the officer had remained unconscious for weeks after surgery. During that time, military investigators discovered the mission had involved information still protected by national security. Every person connected to the operation signed silence agreements. Medical staff were thanked privately, but could never be recognized publicly. Emily remembered signing papers she barely had time to read. She had forgotten about them. The military had not. Watch what happens next. Sometimes the greatest reward arrives long after the hardest work is done. Emily turned another page. The handwriting changed. These words had been written by the injured officer himself. He explained that he never forgot the nurse who had quietly refused to give up when others believed his chances were fading. He remembered opening his eyes briefly during recovery and seeing someone place his scratched dog tag beside his bed before slipping away without waiting for thanks. Emily had never told anyone she had done that. She thought he had been asleep. She thought no one had noticed. He had. A lump rose quietly in her throat, not because her name appeared in the letter, because someone had remembered a moment she believed belonged only to her. Behind the convoy, the clouds slowly began to break apart. Thin rays of sunlight reflected from rainwater pooled across the pavement. The young soldier holding the wooden case lowered his head again. His jaw tightened. He was fighting something. Emily could see it now, the same quiet battle she had seen in hundreds of patients trying not to cry in public. The old man gently rested one hand on the young soldier's shoulder. Only then did Emily understand. The boy was not there simply to carry the case. He carried part of the story. The letter continued. Years after the officer recovered, he spent months searching for the nurse who had saved more than his life. He learned she had quietly paid for medicine for strangers. He learned she stayed after shifts without recording overtime. He learned she never accepted public praise. The officer decided that if she never wanted recognition, he would respect that wish. Until the day she retired. Only then would the truth belong to her. Emily lowered the paper. The parking lot blurred slightly. She blinked several times before realizing her eyes had filled with tears she never felt begin. She quickly wiped them away. Old habits. Always remain calm. Always stay steady. Always help the next person first. That had been her way for 12 years. The old man noticed anyway. He gave another small nod. Not out of sympathy, out of understanding. He knew what it cost to stay strong for everyone else. If this story reminds you of someone who carried heavy days without asking for credit, consider sharing it with them later. Quiet people rarely hear how much they matter. Emily unfolded the final page. Only one paragraph remained. The officer wrote that if she was reading these words, he was no longer alive to thank her himself. The sentence struck harder than anything before it. She stared at the page. Her breathing stopped for one long moment. Gone. He was gone. The man whose life she had fought to save. The man who remembered her kindness for 12 years. Gone. She closed her eyes. The rain, the engines, the crowd. Everything disappeared. Only silence remained. The old man stepped closer. Very gently, he explained that the officer had lived almost 11 more years after that operation. He had returned to service. He had trained younger soldiers. He had built a family. He had watched his son grow into the uniform, now standing only a few feet away. Emily slowly turned toward the young soldier. Their eyes met for the first time. She understood immediately. This was his son. The resemblance suddenly felt overwhelming. Not just the face, the quiet strength, the steady breathing, the respectful posture. Every small habit carried echoes of the father she remembered from the trauma room. The young soldier reached into his pocket. He removed another silver dog tag. Unlike the scratched one Emily held, this one looked new. The names were different. The chain was brighter. But both tags rested side by side in his hands like two generations connected by one night. Emily finally understood why the convoy had crossed 3 states. It had never been about ceremony. It had been about keeping a promise. The old man looked toward the wooden case. The young soldier stepped forward. With slow, careful hands, he opened the polished lid. Inside rested a folded American flag. Perfectly folded, perfectly still. Beneath it lay a military medal inside dark blue velvet, and underneath both rested a small leather notebook. Emily recognized it instantly. It had been sitting beside the officer's hospital bed during recovery. She remembered placing it into the bedside drawer before ending her shift. She thought it had stayed with him forever. Apparently, he had saved it for her. The notebook looked worn from years of careful handling. Its corners had softened. Several pages were marked with folded edges. The old man quietly explained that every year on the anniversary of his rescue, the officer wrote one new page inside. Not about war, not about medals, about gratitude. Emily's hands trembled again. This time, she did not hide it. For 12 years, she believed that difficult winter night had ended when her shift ended. Now she realized it had continued quietly inside another person's life every single year. And the notebook waiting in the wooden case held every one of those forgotten years.